Boker Tov, everybody. Nice to see everybody. I don't know how many people, maybe today already people aren't working. A lot of things closed down early. Okay, let's continue from in the Siddur. Of course, we have always try to connect a little bit to the Parsha. So we do have a little bit, I think, the idea of prayer in the Parsha. Anybody want to tell me where you have the idea of davening, perhaps, in the Parsha?
Oh, I haven't seen that.
I shouldn't start with the question right away, but
yes.
So, excellent. Vahi bayamim harabim haim. At the end of the chapter 2, it was after a long time, and Parah died. Vayamet melech Mitzrayim ve'enchu b'nei Yisrael min avodah. And the Jewish people, they translate here, groaned because of the work. Vayizaku, and they cried out. Vatal shavatam Elohim min avodah. And their cries went up to heaven. Vayishma Elohim et nakatam, and God heard their cries or their moaning. Vayiskor Elohim et brito, he remembered his covenant. Right. Of course, the Torah doesn't tell us that they prayed exactly, but the Vayizaku, that's the idea. But they screamed, they cried out to God, and that is a form of prayer. Or if you want to put it more eloquently, in a sense, this is prayer without words. Which is sort of, we've discussed before how Rav Soloveitchik explains that's the whole notion of shofar. We pray with words. We all know words. We discussed this. Words are confining. We can't express ourselves fully in words. Prayer emanates from the heart, not from the lips. So the lips is just the mechanism to try to express what we have in our heart. So Vayitaku, and they cried out. They didn't say anything, and we know that. And that's why the Rav Soloveitchik explains, we blow shofar, we say the words, okay, do this, forgive us, help us, you're the king, etc. And then we don't know what else to say, so we're just going to blow. We're going to blow out, and we know that the shofar is crying, that the shvarim and the true are this sighing and wailing, the two different forms of crying, and that's why our shofar has those sounds. The tekiah is the cries have to be surrounded by sort of a confident, upbeat sound. The tekiah is not a sound of crying, but the shvarim and the trua has to be surrounded by the tekiah. But those are the crying. So that's you have in this week's Parsha Vayisaku. They cried out to God, and there's a little bit of a form of prayer. Of course, they didn't really know how to pray. They didn't know about Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. They did a little bit. That's next week's Parsha Vayikra. Shmi Hashem. I appeared to your forefathers. That's what God tells Moshe. But of course, and we know that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are the originators, so to speak, of prayer, with the laws of prayer derived from Chana, something we haven't really discussed much, but hopefully in future weeks we'll have an opportunity to discuss that. Okay, so we left off at, we finished last week, HaGomel Chasadim Tovim La'amo Yisrael, God who, that last of the Birchat HaShachar, the long bracha, the dual bracha, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, we want chesed to be good for us. Not all chesed is good. Sometimes the kindness, too much of something good is sometimes bad, but we also explained at the end, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, that we want chesed. We don't want to get safe from, we're bankrupt and now we got unbankrupt. We want to not get bankrupt in the first place. The chasadim should be in good things, not bad things. Okay, and we discussed the Yetzer Hara and the Beiral, the bracha. The bracha is really going in the business world as we're about to enter in the day, and that's where you make your mark as an observant person. The Beit Midrash and the shul doesn't. It's not so hard to be an observant Jew in shul. Maybe it is hard, but it's a lot easier than out in the marketplace. That's the true mark of a Jew. The true mark of a person's character is what we see them in business and how they conduct themselves in the hustle and bustle away from the spiritual anchors of the shul or the Beit Midrash. And that's, of course, that's the essence of being a Jew. B'toch ha'ir, chamishim tzadikim b'toch ha'ir, 50 righteous people in the midst of the city. If Torah doesn't have an influence, if it doesn't impact on us on our day-to-day living, it's really not so worthwhile. What does it accomplish? So that's that's the tension we have today. That's the struggle. How do we bring Torah into the marketplace? But for sure, on an individual basis, that's what we got to do. Okay, that was last week's discussion, more or less. Now we continue. Yehi Ratzon mafanecha. So I don't know. In my siddur, it's printed in small letters. I don't know if it's printed in your siddur in small letters. I'm using the Koran siddur. May it be the will of your God, right? We had that also at the beginning of the bracha. Yehi Ratzon mafanecha, Shem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu, shetargilenu b'Toratecha. So here you have it again. Yehi Ratzon mafanecha, Shem Elokai v'Elokei Avotai. So first of all, you'll notice something. It's a private prayer. It's very unusual. It's not written in the plural. We know that all our prayers are We don't pray for health for us. We pray Rofei Cholei Amo Yisrael, that all the Jewish people shall be healed. We always pray in the plural. That's it's not a nice thing to pray for yourself only. We betoch shar Cholei Yisrael, but all our prayers are in the plural. So we'll get in a moment. This is written in the private. Okay, so where does this come from? So let me share my screen. This comes from a Gemara in Brachot. This prayer actually appears in the Gemara, which is I guess part of our prayers appear in Tanakh and part appears in the Gemara. So here it is. Okay, so the Gemara in Brachot tells us, I think it's a series of 9 prayers. It tells us, and it has the same format. Rav Elazar batar de Messiahim slote. Rav Elazar, when he finished praying, batar means afterwards, slote is praying. When he finishes prayers, at the end of prayers, which probably means at the end of the Shmon Esrei, so the Gemara gives off a list of series of prayers that people used to see, most of which we don't do, but some of it we've, as you'll see, have been incorporated into our Siddur. So Rav Elazar prayed, Yehi Ratzon Mefanecha Hashem Elokeinu, right? Same thing. Teshkein b'Foreinu Ava v'Achva v'Shalom v'Reut. We discussed this, I think, in our second class, that God should put among us Ava Achva Shalom v'Reut. Sounds like a wedding, Gila Rina Ditza v'Chetva Ava Achva Shalom v'Reut. But it's the love, our relationship to God is, of course, compared to a wedding, the bride and the groom, God and the Jewish people. But we also discussed V'ahavta l'orecha kamocha, that before you daven, I think based on the Ariya, they say you should have the notion to love your neighbor, because how can we approach God asking him for things if we don't have a relationship with our neighbor? Ben Adam l'chavero is the prerequisite for Ben Adam l'makom. So the first thing he prays, we should have love and companionship and peace and friendship among their people. Okay, we're not going to go through all of them, but just show you it's interesting. Rabbi Yochanan, who is the leading Tana in the land of Israel. Rabbi Yochanan is the first generation after Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the first generation of Amorim. All the Amorim, sort of the key ones in Israel, were his students. He was the Chavrut of Reish Lakish, famously. Rabbi Yochanan, we discussed, had a tragic life, lost 10 children. But he lived a very long life, and he's the most important apparently of the Amoraim, I would say, in the land of Israel. But okay, Yehi Ratzon Mefanecha shetatzitz b'bashtenu. We shouldn't be embarrassed. Boshet b'itratenu. This is a sort of, in a sense, a negative prayer. We should be saved from negative things, which I guess what I just said makes a lot of sense. But titlabesh b'rachamecha, God have mercy upon us. So you can see, in a sense, that I think the personal idea here, titazer b'chaninatenu, listen to our, pleas to you, etc. Then Rav Zera said, he's a shorter prayer, shalom nechta, we shouldn't sin. That's it. Our prayer, we should be good. Help us, God. We need it's up to us, but help us a little bit. And we shouldn't be embarrassed. We shouldn't be embarrassed from our parents. That's an interesting idea. I remember Ozer Glickman, alav shalom, was talking about combining business and Torah. I know Rabbi Ozer Glickman, who was Rosh Yeshiva at YU, he was also the director of global operations for CIBC. I think he was the third person after the CEO, like number 3 in the hierarchy of CIBC, which is one of the big banks in Canada, Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. He worked in the business world for many years. He's a brilliant person, became a Rosh Yeshiva at YU afterwards, a fascinating person. But we had the pleasure of having him for Shabbos a number of years ago. Unfortunately, he passed away. He dropped dead. He keeled over a couple of years ago and whatever. It's very sad. But he was in the process of setting up a Business Ethics Institute. And this was his life, combining Torah and the business world. But he would always say that if you're not sure always say, remember he told us, when he was in Toronto, I had him speak at Chat. He came guest speakers, and he spoke about how Wayne Gretzky was their client, and CIBC, and all the things, that kids would be interested in. His interesting stories from working at CIBC and being a Rabbi, but he told the high school kids that you're not sure if what you're doing is right or wrong. Ask, what would your mother say if she saw you doing it? That's all you have to do. You go through life asking, what would your mother say? And you're going to act in a very appropriate way. So shalom, we shouldn't be embarrassed. Avotenu doesn't, obviously I'm interpreting not just as our fathers, means our parents, our ancestors, that we should live up to what is expected of us. Okay, but that's just, it's a very short But it's not, we shouldn't be embarrassed, not in general, that's of course true, but we shouldn't be embarrassed. We should live up to our parents. I don't want to get guilty, whatever, but there obviously that has to inspire us. Then you have Rabbi Chia, that Torah umanatenu. Torah should be our life, our main occupation should be in Torah. Okay, and then here we go. This one, so those you never heard of. I mean, when you learn Daf Yomi, so you study them, but whoever heard of those prayers? Rav is a contemporary, sort of, I guess, of Rabbi Yochanan. Rav and Shmuel are the first generation of Amorim, but Rav he came from Bavel, then he came to Eretz Yisrael to study with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the editor of the Mission. Then he went back and he established Torah in Bavel. Rav is probably the most important Amora, period. Without Rav, there probably wouldn't be a Babylonian Talmud. He came to Bavel, and the Gemara relates how pathetic. I mean that's how sad the religious situation was in Bavel. Jews were totally ignorant and not observant, and Rav really recreated Jewish life, and he established the yeshivas in Surah, and he that first generation. His contemporary is Shmuel, and Rav Yochanan was sort of his contemporary in the land of Israel. Anyway. So he has a famous thing. Remember, this is every day. The Gemara doesn't say, but when they finished davening, and this was the prayer they would say, so we, of course, recognize this from the Rosh Chodesh benching. So this is interesting. This got transferred from the daily prayer of Rav that we say now once a month. That should be a wonderful month. It's a beautiful prayer. It's long. All the good things that we want. This way, that's Gomel Chasadim Tovim. God should fulfill our desires for good. Sometimes we pray for the bad things, as we discussed. Okay, and then here we go. Rabbi, this is our prayer. So we say this every day in the Siddur, but before we daven. In other words, remember, we're in the pre-davening stage. Davening is Shmon Esrei. Everything's just a lead up. So we said Birchat Shachar. We thank God for walking and standing up and getting to see and having shoes, etc. And then we go into the business world, and then we have the prayer of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the final editor of the Mishnah. And okay, so now we can do the prayer in the Siddur. You'll notice, by the way, that in the Gemara, it's in plural. Yehi Ratzon Afanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu, plural, shetatzilenu. You should save us. May say, I don't know, Azu Panim Yetzirah. It's interesting. In the Gemara, it's said in the plural. In the Siddur, they transferred it to the singular. I don't exactly know why. Maybe we can, I don't know, give some theory. The Gemara continues. I just want to show you Rav Safra, his prayer, and what's his prayer? And then Rav Alexander. Then we have one more prayer that we should be familiar with. This is Rava. Rava is a fourth generation Amora, right? There are 6-7 generations of Amorim. There are 6-7 generations of Tanaim. Then he wrote the Mishnah that ends in the year 220. And then you have, by the fourth generation, we're talking now the mid-4th century. That's what we're talking about in terms of chronologically. So there's very little Torah in the land of Israel. The first Rav Yochanan's generation, there's still Torah. Rav Yehuda Nasi, but it's waning. That's why they had to write the Mishnah. The Romans have taken over. The Jews are not sovereign. It's not so simple. But the fourth generation, really, Torah is almost predominantly in Bavel. This is the Rava and Abaye, the famous argument between Abaye and Rava. So he says, this, again, apparently every day after he davened, Elokai Lechelon Atzarti no Kedai. God, I'm not worthwhile. What did you create for me? I'm a sinner. Now that I was created, it's like I wasn't created. I'm not living up to my mission. I'm dust when I live. How much more so when I die? I'm like full of embarrassment when I come to you. I'm so don't live up to my potential. Yehi Ratzon, God help me, I shouldn't sin. And what I did sin, erase it. And of course, you probably should recognize this. This comes as the Gemara itself says. And this is where Rav HaMenuna would say on Yom Kippur. Rava said this every day. But Rav Nuneh said on Yom Kippur, and that's, of course, what we have it. Our Siddur, we say that our machzor, that's the, we put that in our machzor at the end of Shemon Esrei in the Ela. I believe we only say that at the Ela. So it's sort of a last plea, God, you created us, we're not living up, but have mercy on us. Okay, that's just the general to know. It's very interesting to see. And again, you see the fluidity of the prayer book that we have lost in many ways, unfortunately. Right? We discussed that a number of times. The prayer book, it's from the heart. We can't have fixed words of prayer. That it's an oxymoron to fix the words of prayer. It's not at all what prayer is. But we had no choice. We had no choice. What can we do? People wouldn't know what to pray, what to say. So we therefore did fix the have a fixed siddur. And of course, as we mentioned, the Shemon Esrei remains silent. So you have that possibility to add in your personal prayers. That's okay. So let's discuss what he says a little bit. May it be the will, our God and God of our fathers and mothers. You should save us today and every day. So it's interesting that was not mentioned in the Gemara. That's b'chol yom. The Gemara just says today. B'chol yom me azei panim ume azut panim. So what's azei panim and what's azut panim? Are they different? Anybody want to say? What's azei panim and azut panim? So how do the English translate? Arrogance. Us panim is someone who's arrogant, right? So we know that, okay, so let's take that we know the quality of coming, the most important, well, it's hard to say the most important quality, but let's say the only quality of Moshe Rabbeinu that's mentioned is humility, that Moshe was an Anab. But we assume Anab and Azut Panim are opposites of each other. So if you take a look, let's take a look here now at the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. I think it's a well-known Mishnah. Mishnah says, the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avot, Yehuda ben Tema Omer, right? Yehuda ben Tema says, have a az kedamer, be as strong as a leopard, kal kenesher, swift as an eagle, ratz kitzvi, run like a deer, gibor ka'ari, and as ferocious or courageous as a lion, lasot ritzon avicha shebashmaim. Okay, so here, az is something very, very positive, right? You should be as strong as a leopard. Now, I don't know, who's stronger, a leopard or a lion? I assume a leopard is stronger than a lion. No, I mean, I assume a lion is stronger than a leopard. A leopard is quicker. I don't know exactly, but anyways, you don't want to get in a fight with the leopard either. But you should be as strong as a leopard in the way you run God. In other words, I assume fearless, quick, right? Etc. So here, Az is used in a very, very positive sense. And in the same Mishnah, Yehuda ben Tevi would also say, Az panim, one who has Az panim legehenim, a person who's an Az panim. How do they translate it? The arrogant, okay? It's, of course, that doesn't capture it. Panim, it's the face. Az is strength, the strength of the face. Legehenim, you go to Gehenim. Uboshet panim, one who is Hashem, Gan Eden. I just mentioned the prayer, Yehi Ratzon sheibana Beit Hamikdash. Okay, great. So I just mentioned that the prayer of Rosh Chodesh. So one of the things we say in Rosh Chodesh, Chaim she'ein bahem busha uchlima, right? Chaim shalosha v'chavod. We don't want to have any shame or embarrassment. So I think I mentioned once before that in certain editions, certain communities, they used to say Chaim sheyesh bahem busha uchlima. They would pray for bu. Now it's two different things. One is to be embarrassed. That's a terrible thing. One is to have shame. A sense of shame is good. The Gemara says that the three character traits of a Jew are Rachmanim, Baishanim, and Gomlei Chasadim. That the Jews have three character traits. It means the Jews are supposed to have three character traits. It doesn't. It's not a racist comment that we're born this way. It means that what it means to be a Jew is to be Rachmanim, to be full of mercy, Baishanim, to be full of shame, to be embarrassed to do so. You don't act. How would your mother? What would your mother say? You don't act in a certain way. There's a sense of shame that we've lost today, of course, and gomlei chasadim. And we do acts of kindness so much so that the Gemara says, if you meet a Jew who doesn't have one of these character traits, you should say maybe they're not really Jewish. Maybe their grandmother, who had an illicit relationship. It's like an amazing Gemara. Again, the Gemara is not telling us, that you had an illicit relation. The Gemara is saying it cannot be that a Jew doesn't have one of these character traits. So busha, it can depend on how it's used. It can be a positive or a negative. That's always the beautiful concept in Judaism, right? Everything's a fine line. It's nothing is good or bad. It's all the application of how we use it. So shame can be shame in a positive sense and can be embarrassment in a very negative sense. We know to embarrass somebody in public is considered worse than murder. The Binyan Sion thing mentioned, Rav Yaakov Ethlinger, he's not the only one. But Rav Yaakov Ethlinger he was the Rebbe of Shimshon Falhirsch, lived in, you see it in print, I have it here. It's like mind-boggling. He has a responsa. Responsa means practical halakha. When people have a question, they ask the rabbi, what do I do in this situation? So he asks, if I have to embarrass somebody in public, what do I have to do? So he says, you have to give up your life. What do you mean, what do you have to do? The Gemara says it's worse than the murder. So obviously, you can't kill somebody to save your life. So you can't embarrass somebody to save your life. This is like in Ripley's Believe It or Not. The consensus of most authorities is we don't accept this view. But the fact that such a view exists should give us pause. Before and when the Gemara says is worth, I don't know if it means one time, it means a person who habitually, like Gemara says, one who talks lashon hara, terrible. Everybody talks lashon hara occasionally. It's last night shir, Jews didn't talk in Mitzrayim, whatever, but it means a habitual, a baal lashon hara, a master, a gossiper, etc. So here you have the same thing. Aspanim on the one hand, aspanim lekehenim in the same Mishnah. We should be as strong as like a leopard, but if we're arrogant, and I guess it means us. See, one is us to be strong, and one is aspanim. Aspanim in the face, it sort of implies, it's not who you really are. It's the impression you give off. I don't know. There's something about the person's how they live, and aspanim, one who's arrogant, goes to Gehenna. And of course, what is that? Why does a arrogant person go to Gehenna? Well, what it means, an arrogant person, in other words, is much more likely sin. What does it mean Moshe was the most humble person? Well, why do we talk about Moshe's humility? Because when you see greatness, you become humble. When you go to the Grand Canyon, wow, you're awed. Whenever you see something amazing, you're awed. So Moshe is the only person, he faced God of gods. He was blown away. He saw God. Oh my gosh. He was like, so of course you become humble. I mentioned, I mentioned Wayne Gretzky. So you play hockey if you get to meet Wayne Gretzky. I'm dating myself, of course. I don't know who's Connor McDavid. I don't know who are the today in hockey. Matthew, what's the guy in the Leafs? Matthew, I forget his name. All right. Anyway, so if you get to play hockey with these guys, lahavdil, so you're blown away. It makes you a little bit humble. You meet a great scientist. You meet someone who's really great. It makes you humble. So Moshe, meeting God, became the most humble person, and therefore you realize how much more you have to grow. That as great as you might be. I thought I was a good hockey player until I played with Wayne Gretzky once. And oh my God, whenever I was like, I lost everything. So I meet God. Oh my gosh. So you realize what it's like. So one who's arrogant is never going to learn. We all know, I'm saying everything's obvious. We all know this, but sometimes the most obvious has to be said the most often. But when the person's arrogant, they're not willing to learn. They're not willing to hear from anybody. I know it all. So that's when it goes to Gehenna. It's not that arrogance is worse necessarily than other sins a person. It's not even a sin. It's a character trait. It's just it leads to sin. Arrogance is much more likely to lead to sin because when a person knows it all, no one's going to tell him. So that's what the Mishnah says. As panim lekehenim, as used in a proper way, that's the way to worship God. But an aspanim goes to Gehenim, and a boshet panim goes to Gan Eden. Okay, so but it's interesting. So the first prayer of Rabbi says, the first thing, I shouldn't be arrogant. That's what Yehi Ratzon, I finished now all the standard brachot that everybody says. This is really a personal thing. We saw it. In other words, and again, it emphasizes the idea of adding your own personal prayers. Today in 2021, 2022, next week, everybody can add their own personal prayer, not just in Shmones, wherever you want. That's we shouldn't lose that. I think we've so much taken that away, the idea to pray from the heart and to use your own words and to pray in any language. The Mishnah and Sota is very clear that tefillah can be done in any language. God understands everything. You don't have to worry. There was debates in the 19th century with Reform, English, German, well, it wasn't English, but German, whatever. So those are political, religious, the tenor of the time. How appropriate is it to pray in English or French or German in Parliament? That has nothing to do with the concept that prayer can be done in every language. That's a Mishnah directly that's a Mishnah in Sota, actually. Okay. Anyway, so that's then he says like this. Okay, now azei panim and azu panim is the two. So the commentaries explain we shouldn't have it and others shouldn't have it towards us. In other words, we shouldn't be arrogant towards others, but we also pray that we shouldn't come in contact with arrogant people. We don't like. If you see someone arrogant, it's a big turnoff. But again, if this is prayer, we're going out into the business world, right? That's how we explain. This is an add-on to the prayer Gomel Chasidim Tovim Lamo Yisrael, which is our way of, as we're going out into the world. When you also add in the fact that this is Rebbe, that's, I believe it's here in this Be'erei HaTfilah by Rabbi Wogelmuth, who taught the Siddur for many years at Maimonides, a close student of Rav Soloveitchik. He taught the course that I was in. Everybody in Maimonides had to take, I don't know, for 1 year or 4 years, I'm not sure, courses on Tfilah. That's very few schools have that, and they put out a book. So I believe he explains that this is Rebbe. Remember, who's Rebbe? Besides why is Rebbe the editor of the Mishnah? Well, why him? I mean, besides the historical time period, Rebbe was a very wealthy man. Came from very wealthy family. We know that. It's a misconception to think that all the great achievements in Jewish history were basically done in periods of wealth and tranquility. You can't write a Shulchan Aruch, you can't write a Mishnah Torah if you're worried about pogroms. It's very very difficult. Yeah, sometimes people did, but generally the great works of Jewish literature were written when people didn't have to worry about pogroms. So Rebbe Yehuda, now that's why they wrote the Mishnah. As life was getting worse, they realized they really needed it. But Rebbe Yehuda Nasi, we know, had very good relations with the Romans. Just like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, in a sense, Antinonis, the Gemara has many stories. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, we know it's in there. There was an understanding. Rome is a powerful empire. I won't even get into theology of it. That perhaps this is God's will. I mean, that, did you remember for the Talmudic rabbis, they saw the destruction as a punishment for the Jewish people. When they say sinat chinam or the various reasons they give, they understood that what sinat chinam caused the Beit HaMikdash to fall. I mean, it leads internal strife, made it easier to take over. But the rabbis are not discussing the historical ideas. Just like in Egypt, why were the Jews slaves in Egypt? They're not discussing historical ideas. They're very important, but that wasn't relevant to the rabbis. The rabbis are interested in religious messages we can take. So the rabbi is saying, what message should we learn from the destruction of the temple? It doesn't mean why was the temple destroyed? And it's a mistranslation, really. The rabbis, now the temple was destroyed, what can we learn from this? So we should learn, we better get along better as a people. We shouldn't have internal strife. We're going to get that be easier to be captured. But it's not so much that's the cause, because Romans were very strong. They wanted to capture the world. Whatever, the reasons don't contradict each other, but the rabbis focus. So so there was an understanding among the rabbis that when nations took over, that was God's will, and we should work for them. It's a very again, I don't want to get any political thing, but we all know the Jewish tradition was you pray for the welfare of the government. I showed you last year in Pirkei Avot, the tefillot. You get an old siddur from Russia. They're prayers for the Tsar. They prayed for the Tsar. Whether they meant it, it didn't matter. They understood that they had to work with the Tsar. And today, I know the rabbi in Russia is very close to Putin. Whatever you think of him, that was the Jewish thing, that who's ever in power, we defer ourselves to power a little bit. Again, I don't want to get into a Zionism and the new Jew. Great, but not. This is not the forum for that. But on a religious level, there is something to think about it. So it was not uncommon. Again, Rabbi Akiva thought, differently. Rabbi Akiva, he believed in the Bar Kochba revolt. Other rabbis didn't. You're never going to have one opinion. It's always like that. But Rebbe himself had very good relations with the Romans, and he understood. So he claimed that this is Rebbe's prayer, that in dealing with the Romans every day, he wanted to say, they're a little bit arrogant. I should be arrogant, and he's nervous, as we're going to see. from a din kasher, an evil judgment or whatever. That's what they explained. But anyways, this prayer is said in the time period a couple generations after the temple is destroyed. And okay. Anyway, so azupanim, that's just it's always right that's why these were the personal prayers. We always pray for things that impact us on a personal level. Anyway, okay. Adam ra, chavera, shachen ra, pegara. What's all this? So you should be safe from Adam ra. What's the difference between an Adam ra and a chavera?
I guess you're more likely to be influenced by a chavera.
Okay, so I would say, very good. Okay, I would say an Adam ra means a bad person. By the way, what's the definition of a bad person? What's the definition of a tzaddik? I love. Let's say something very upbeat now. Easy, I know, easy to do, but it makes life easier. What's the definition of a tzaddik according to the Rambam? It's in Hilchot Tshuva. The Rambam writes this in Hilchot Tshuva. It's a popular. That's one of the most studied sections of the Rambam. Before Yom Kippur. What is it? Why do we have the Rambam writes this at tzaddik? So the Rambam writes that tzaddik is 50%. Everybody, the Rambam begins. Everybody has a veirah and mitzvot. Everybody sins. Everybody does mitzvot. Afilu rekanim shebahem. We just had that in Daf Yomi 3 days ago. Even the empty reket. There's a discussion when you read the Megillah and Reket, the 14th, whether the wall cities, Reket is Tveria, so why is it called Reket? So it's a play on words, Rekanim. Even the empty ones are full of mitzvot, like a pomegranate, like the seed. So that's a beauty. Even you say hello to somebody, that's a mitzvah. There's so many ways we can do mitzvot. So everybody has mitzvot, even if they don't intend to do mitzvot. And everybody sins. Whoever has 50% plus one mitzvot is a tzaddik. You don't have to be perfect to be a tzaddik, right? Of course, the reverse is also true. You have 50% plus one averot, you're a rasha. But that's how. But we don't know. It's not adding. Like, first of all, we don't know ourselves. But even if we did know, they're qualitatively different mitzvot take on different importance and etc. But an Adam ra would appear to be someone who is bad, just a bad person. You have nothing to do with him. But you work in the environment with people, you work with him. So, a damra, somebody, whatever, we know what, a person who's a negative influence. A chavera is your friend, but your friend who's bad for you. In other words, a damra, he's not necessarily your friend. A chaver is your friend, but we all know that. How many people get into trouble because of who they hang out with, who their friends are. When you're teenagers, the most important thing, the biggest influence in their life is their friends, not their parents. At some point, maybe it's their parents, maybe before, afterwards. But while they're teenage years, everybody knows that their friends have the biggest influence. There may be great friends with them, but there may be not a good friend to have. It's very hard, But so you have to be saved from friends, and even sometimes your friends may mean well, but it's not a good friend for you. So you have an Adam ra, that's in general, a chavera, and a shachen ra, and a bad neighbor. Like a good neighbor, Allstate is there, right? Remember that commercial for Allstate Insurance? Okay, sorry about that. A good neighbor, right? So you have, and now again, it's like neighbors, neighbors don't have the same influence as friends, but we're all influenced by our neighborhood. And of course, you don't want to have a neighbor that you have to fight with. Good fences make good neighbors, but you want to we should be far away from a bad person, a friend who's bad for us. That's why I would translate it, and a neighbor who's not good for us. So I just want to show you just an amazing halacha in the Rambam. It's like one of these mind-boggling halachot, not like, I don't know what planet we're living on. Like, I don't know anybody who, let's take a look at the Rambam. So this is the Rambam in Hilchot Deyot. So, the Rambam, divided Jewish law into 14 books. And the first book is Sefer Mada, the book of knowledge, Mada, right? Science, knowledge. This is that's the quote unquote the most controversial of his books. That's where he discusses in the beginning. I don't understand metaphysics, and that's where he says this learning Gemara is a little small thing. Yeah, Havayat Abaye v'Rava. The arguments of Abaye, that's like davar katan. Masay Merkava, physics, metaphysics. Oh, that's big stuff. Science and philosophy. That's what you should spend your time on. So there wasn't not so many people like that necessarily. But the Rambam in Hilchot Deot, I don't even know how to translate it. Here, there's human disposition, knowledge. This is where the Rambam gives his health advice, how to live our life, the golden mean, beautiful ideas. Our character traits that we're supposed to develop. So the Rambam here writes, it's normal, it's human nature, it's impossible. We are influenced in our thoughts, deot, and our masim, and our actions based on your friends and your neighborhood. I grew up in Canada. I think a particular way. Americans slightly different. Okay, Americans and Canadians not so different. But Israelis different. It's a different culture. That's you have to know. Europeans, a totally different culture. That's always been mentioned. That's one of the very most important things about a posek. You have to have a rabbi who is from your country. In other words, who understands your lifestyle. If you go to university, have a PhD, don't ask your shilas to a rabbi who is opposed to going to university, believes in kollel. It just doesn't make sense. And if you're in kollel, don't ask your shilas to a rabbi who's at YU. It just does. I mean, in the whatever, you understand what I mean. It has to be someone who's from your country. You understand. We're all influenced, and that's life. That's normal. Therefore, so therefore, you want to be close to people who are righteous and wise people. So I can learn from them. You got to run away from evil. Like, we have that, but then the Rambam writes here like this, unbelievable. So you have to live with people. I love that. Everybody always says that. If all the countries, all the neighborhoods that you know about and they have influence, they're all really bad moral neighborhoods. Like in our times, it's always we're always in the worst. We're not always the worst. You cannot go to a place where the leaders are good. You need a place where you have moral leaders. That's the most important thing about our political leaders. They should be moral and integrity. You can't go there. You can't travel. There's a travel ban. No flights. So you got to live alone. You can't go to the marketplace. Yeshev badad. Quotes a verse from Eicha, Lamentations. We sat alone by Edom and we were quiet. The destruction. There's nothing left. The great city had nobody there. And people don't even let him sit in his house alone. They drive him crazy. They have all these rules that he's got to do, and he has to be with them. So you know what you got to do? You have to move to a cave. Marot. You have to move to a cave. L'chavanim, I think, is a cliff. I think, or the desert. You got to move to the desert. But they're chatim. Do not live with sinners. It's like I don't understand. I mean, I read the words of the Rambam, but like I'm blown away. Like, what? You're going to move to a desert? Move to a cave? You got to move to a cave. So the truth of the matter, now you begin to understand why certain Jewish groups have totally ghettoized themselves in the modern world. They're not crazy. I mean, whatever. It's not my lifestyle. I don't think that's the way of Torah, but I understand where they're coming from. They're afraid they're going to be so negatively influenced. Whether it works or not that's a totally different. I mean, it's an important question whether it works, but that's not the question. In other words, if you want to understand the idea, that the Rambam is very clear. So it depends how literally we want to take this idea. I always think it's I remember I think I mentioned this once. When I was on the board of our kids, school, of the elementary school they went to. So the school was basically whatever, modern Orthodox religious Zionist school, whatever that means. So it means the kids all come from modern Orthodox homes, whatever that means. So they basically had a policy. They wouldn't accept kids who were not Shomer Shabbat, not Shomer Shabbat. So I thought that's a terrible policy. I think that's a horrendous policy. Believe me, if they had that policy, Avram Avinu wouldn't have, we all know this, the standards to get into this. I'm talking the modern world. I'm not talking about the, television sets, those schools. I'm talking about in our world. And I fought for, I said there should be, most people think I'm crazy, but there should be a policy. We should aim to get 25% of the school non-Shomer Shabbos in the school. Beautiful. Maybe, everybody's concerned what the influence they'll have on us. What about the influence we'll have on them? My wife often tells me where she went to school. There are many kids in her grade who were not observant. It was the school a little to the right of the modern Orthodox school, sort of not whatever. And many of the kids who came from non-frum homes and weren't from even when they went to school, eventually later in life became observant. There was something they gained from that Jewish education that impacted on them years later. So I think that's we're always concerned on the negative influence others have on us, but we should also look at the positive influence we can have on others. So you have to know yourself. Are you going to be, different people? Some people can hold their principles when it's, even in a weaker environment, and some people are greatly influenced. You got to know yourself. Do you have to get a wise, quote unquote, or should you be out there, doing whatever, reaching out to people? So it's like all these prayers, like everything in life, it's complex a little bit. But here, Rabbi is just praying he should be saved from negative influences. He's out in the world. He's dealing with the Romans on a daily basis. There's an Adam Ra, a Chaver Ra, and a Shachen Ra, and that's it's, by the way, it's interesting. One of the Meforshim in the tefillot, Siddur, one of the classical commentaries on the Siddur, he says this is, of course, we have in Pirkei Avot. Here, I'll just show you very quickly, which we know, the Mishnah we did last year. Where are we going here? Pirkei Avot. So here, this is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, right? His students, right? What's the good path a person should have? Ayin tova, chaver tov, shachen tov. So we have here a chaver tov, and we have here a shachen tov. That's the most important. And what's the really bad thing? Well, what's the bad thing? Ayin ra'ah, a bad eye. A chaver tov, a chaver ra, and a shachen ra. But we don't have Adam. We have Chaver and Shachen. Chaver Tov, Shachen Tov. So he says the obvious. What's an Adam Ra? Adam Ra means Adam Tov is an Ayin Tova, and Adam Ra is an Ayin Ra'ah. In other words, you see from the Mishnah talks about Shachen and Chaver. So the Ayin Tova, the definition of a good person, is somebody who has a good eye, and the definition of somebody who's a negative person is somebody who has a bad eye. What, as we discussed last year, what's a bad eye? Generally jealousy. In other words, I look upon other people. You give that person a look. So an ayin tova, or you give that person a look. You're so excited to see them. You're so happy, wonderful. You're gracious. You're willing to share. That's an ayin tova, a good eye, and an ayin ra. So that's the definition. It goes by Adam Ra, but that's what he explains. Adam Ra means ayin tova, a good eye, being gracious to others, looking upon them favorably. Okay, so you want to be safe from Adam Ra, see our environment, so to speak. Chavera, friends, but are not good for us. Shachen, and our immediate neighbor, they also influence Pegara, something out of the blue. A pega, a pigua, an attack is something we should be safe from. Surprises, negative surprises, so to speak. Satan hamashchit. So this is very interesting. Satan hamashchit. How would you translate Satan hamashchit?
Satan is,
Anybody want to give that a try? The Satan. So that could be the state of Israel. The Satmar Rebbe felt that the state of Israel is this. I don't say that as a. Obviously it's not our view, but that was his view. The state of Israel, modern Zionism, is a Satan. What does a Satan mean? It's very interesting. We don't talk about it so much. Satan hamashchit. Lashchit is to destroy. Hashchata, bal tashchit. You can't destroy things. Hashchata, even to shave with a razor. That's also a form of hashchata. Bal tashchit. What's Satan hamashchit? So I don't know what a Satan is. So therefore, who else doesn't know what a Satan is? So I looked in like 4 Siddurim. I was curious, how did everybody translate Satan HaMashchit? So the RCA Siddur, I don't have it here. It's a relatively new Siddur, put up by the Rabbinical Council of America. It just came out, I don't know, a year or so ago. I don't know how its traction is with the Koran. It's going to be hard to replace the Koran. First, the Koran had to replace the art scroll, and now whether they're going to use the art scroll, but it's an interesting Siddur. It took many years of work. So the art scroll Siddur translates Satan HaMashchit as a corrupting Satan. So I don't know what a Satan is, but I know what corrupting is. So we don't want to be corrupt when you deal with politicians like Rabbi was. That's important. The Koran says adversary. A Satan is an adversary, a destructive adversary. Okay, meaning so they've taken away, the Satan. We think of angels, or it's much not real. It's like some spiritual idea. So an adversary is much more concrete. Okay, I found that. And then the art scroll, or what I write here, the art scroll, I love this. Destructive spiritual impediment.
Yes.
A satana mashkid is a destructive. Now, listen, translations are impossible. There's no, that's why we mentioned last week, I think, one of the 3-day fast, when the Torah got translated in Greek, the rabbis, that's a sarbateva. That's the other reason that's the first of the slichot. We talk also about the Babylonians surrounding, putting a siege on Jerusalem, but we first talk about they translated the Torah in 3 days and darkness descended. But again, this is as other things, all how it's used. Translations are terrible. It's awful. We have to fast and cry, and translations are necessary. We have to cry even more, or we can rejoice. In other words, without the art scroll translation of the Gemara, the 300,000 people a day learn Gemara because of art scroll translation, and probably the art scroll translation led to the Koran translation. I don't whatever. I'm not the. It's unbelievable. Everything's translated, but it's not so good. There's a lot of negative things, and of course, nobody has to learn Hebrew anymore. That was talked last night. The importance of Hebrew. What do I have to study Hebrew for? I'll just read it in translation. We all do that. I do that myself also sometimes. I too quickly, when I'm reading a Gemara that's a little bit difficult. When I was in yeshiva, so I had a Jastro next to me, Talmudic dictionary. I looked up every word and I figured it out, and I sat there for half an hour. So now I'm a lazy butlin. I'm not going to waste my time with that. So I just look up in Safari, how do they translate it? But that's bad. I mean, it saves me time. But so anyways, art scroll, so every translation has its own commentary. Destructive spiritual impediments. The Hirsch Siddur, which of course he didn't translate. I mean, Hirsch didn't write a commentary on the Siddur, but they have his comments that he put this at. Whoever translated the Hirsch Siddur, anyways, he would have translated it into German. He wouldn't have translated it into English. The Hirsch Siddur has an evil hindrance. Okay, whatever it is. So, and by the way, I noticed this book, Entering Jewish Prayer by Reuven Hammer, when he translates a paragraph, he leaves that word out. He skips over it. He just doesn't translate it. Bad influence. Okay, anyways, Satan machine. Now let's but whether a Satan is some out force or whatever it is, or it's internal, it's ours. I actually think the art scroll translation maybe gets it the best. Destructive spiritual impediment. In other words, something that holds us back from doing what's right. Whether it's an outside force, an internal force, I don't know. An evil hindrance. Okay, very good. Now, din kasher, bal din kasher. From a bad judgment, a ding, or a harsh judgment. Baldin kasher, a harsh litigant. A baldin is a litigant. Ben shu ben bri, whether he's Jewish, whether he's of the covenant. Ben sheino ben bri. So there are two ways to understand this. When a din kasher, either it's talking about Rabbi Yehuda say, I don't want to get into a court case. I don't want to go to court, a Roman court. I don't want to. Once you go to court, you never know what's going to happen, right? And Kahneman, in his fantastic book, Thinking Slow and Fast, the Nobel Prize winner from Israel, he said, a phenomenal book, Thinking Slow and Fast, whatever. So he discusses, because of risk averse, right? We when we lose something, it's at least twice as painful as when we win something. If we make $10,000, we feel happy. If we lose $10,000, we're twice as sad, as happy as we would be for 10,000. That's at least, that is human nature. So people have risk intolerance. So he said that plays very much into our legal system, because you can think some small guy sues a big company for $100 million. Your chances are 95% you'll win the case. But you know what? I'll settle with him for $1 million. I don't want to take that 5% risk. Once it gets to court, I don't know what's going to happen. I have a 5% risk. I'm going to lose $100 million. I'm willing to pay $1 million to get rid of that risk. It's not really fair, because, or you have to figure out how that works. But in other words, about din kasher. Okay, let's forget my psychology here. But about din kasher means you don't want to go to you don't want to din kasher. You don't want to go to court. Once you go to court, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen. A din and about din kasher. Everybody, a good lawyer, a good litigant, you're in trouble. So that's because the courts are not always can't do only God can do justice. There's only Ein Dan Yechidi. You can't judge alone, only God. We do our best. It's a very hard bar, which is why some of the commentaries explain this is talking about the judges are making this prayer. A judge says, I don't want a hard case to come before me. I want a case to come before me that's easy to solve. Because if a hard case comes before me, I might make a mistake. And if I make a mistake, like I told you last week, the shochet doesn't want to be a shochet anymore because he's afraid he's shechted by mistake, and hundreds of people are eating non-kosher food because of him. Okay, that's life. It's not so terrible. I mean, make a mistake, an honest mistake. Okay, we have to live with it. But so we pray that we shouldn't be in a situation where even a mistake happens to us, because there is this notion that we don't want mistakes. That even the animals, right? God, even the animals of tzaddikim are spirit. Pinchas ben Yair's donkey wouldn't eat tray food. That's what the Gemara says. Anyways, but okay, we're not Pinchas ben Yair. So that's what some say, to be safe from a din kasher and about din kasher. It doesn't matter if he's Jewish or not, Jewish, non-Jews. And when it comes to court, we're supposed to go to only a Jewish court. Unfortunately, it's a big problem we have today, a huge problem. If you look in the sources about what they say about going to a non-Jewish court, your hair will stand on edge. It's like got to be among the worst sins there are. Just look at all our Eila mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem, right? You have, these are the laws before you. Lifneihem v'lo lifnei. You're not allowed to go to a non-Jewish court. And obviously in capital cases you are. Moshe Feinstein has lots of chuvas about this. Can you work for the IRS and sue people? He says absolutely. If a Jew is cheating, you can get the government. We're not talking about that. We're talking about two Jews have when we have a state of Israel run then of course we want everything to run through a baiting system. But here in America, whatever, you have two Jews fight, but to be debating the level, the dayanim have to be, the honesty and integrity is very high, but the prohibition of going to a secular court is very severe, very severe. Now, it could be unfortunately, again, some of the Jewish courts are not worthy of the name, and sometimes you have no choice. That's for sure. Again, this is beyond our discussion. It's an important issue, but you have to be very concerned about the integrity of our court system. Is very important. That's why the Gemara says a true judge becomes becomes a partner with God in the process of creation. That's real Torah. That's the real application of Torah. So I'll just end. I'll show you one last quote about the how not to go to court, why we shouldn't go to court. This is a Gemara. We're talking about why the temple was destroyed before. Okay, so the Gemara in Bava Metzia, it's talking about lost objects. This is Perek Eli Metzia. That's what I'm sure many of you, when you first were introduced to Gemara, but that was on page 21. So you didn't get the page, 30 when grade 4 or wherever they introduced the Gemara. Eli Metzia, Shalom Eli Metzia, Ve'el Chayav Lachri is what you can get. But later on in the chapter, quotes a pasuk right before Matan Torah. It's a pasuk in Yitro. God will show us the path that we should walk in. So the Gemara says, Gemiluch Chasadim, the derech is kindness. Yelchu is to go visit people who are sick. Bikur Cholim, Ba is to go to the funeral. Maseh, action is to go to court. Asher Yasun Zulifni Mishur, to act before court. We discussed to avoid court, to compromise, whatever. We don't have time now to get in what Lifni Mishur means in its full complexity, but the idea of compromise, acting before you go to the Shurat Hadin, before you get to court. The judgment is harsh. The judge can't take into account any social factors. But in a compromise, you take all those social factors that don't have legal standing into consideration. Sometimes the law is harsh. You cannot, they're poor, it doesn't matter. It's totally irrelevant. But in a compromise, those are important factors. So that Gemara goes through it, and then the Gemara just says an amazing idea. I'm sure many of you know it, but it's worth repeating. Damar Rav Yochanan, the same Rav Yochanan we had before. You know why Jerusalem was destroyed? It was only destroyed, Ella. The only reason Jerusalem was destroyed, because they followed the law, they judged according to the laws of the Torah. Wow. So the Gemara is like blown away. Well, what? So what should they do? They should do the judges' whatever they feel like it. Well, what are they talking about? That's great. They're doing Din Torah. I said, no. They just followed the legal principle to the law, to the letter. They didn't act beyond the law. Which, of course, there's the Torah law, but sometimes you got to go beyond the Torah because the Torah law is abstract in general cases. But sometimes in the two people in the case, even though you could win in a court of law, you have to go lifnim meshur din. You got to go beyond the call of duty, do more. So the temple, our society was destroyed because they followed the Torah to the letter. It's an amazing mark. If you follow the Torah to the letter, you can destroy Torah. You can destroy Jerusalem. We lost Jerusalem. When a society is so litigious, when they fight about everything, a society cannot exist. So you have to have lifnim meshur din. So that's what Rebbe's praying for. Every day you work in the business world, court cases, left and right. So you want to be in a society, you want to be where you can avoid court, and when you avoid harsh litigants, and when there is a court case, the judges want to pray. That's something you'll have a judge who can, the case is not hard to decide, and we have to be careful. Jews, non-Jews, doesn't matter. We've discussed already, to steal from a non-Jew is a lot worse than stealing from a Jew. All the examples is, I don't know, some people have this idea, steal from the Goyim. I understand that they grew up in Europe and persecution in the pre-war and the Holocaust area where the non-Jews mistreated Jews. It is true. Rav Shach used to tell us that all the time. Of course, if you grew up where they have discriminatory laws against Jews, so the Jews can discriminate back. Obviously, if they pass laws that only Jews pay tax, so you can cheat on that tax. That's not cheating on tax. The government's cheating you. The problem is that we took that attitude, which may have applied in certain parts of Germany, we applied it to America. The Malchut shel Chesed, as Rav Moshe describes it. Obviously, we're dealing with, yes, no, America is not perfect, Canada's not perfect, but it's the most perfect systems we have. And like Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all others. It is what we have. And our justice, there is justice here. And therefore, to cheat a non-Jew is much worse because of the idea of a Chilul Hashem. It's here, Gezel Akum, of course, is forbidden. But anyway, so we want to, whether the Jew, non-Jew, honesty doesn't have any boundaries. Okay, let's just quickly review. And then, we discussed, of course, that prayer we have already in this week's Parsha, Vayetzaku Hashem. They called out to God. Prayer can come with no words like our shofar. Okay, then we have this extra prayer of Rabbi. So we showed the Gemara has at least 9 different rabbis. Every time when they finish, this is like a post prayer. We say this one pre-prayer, but like we say, Elokai Neshmesh and Aseleman Shmecha. We didn't even see that one, right? The Elokai Netzor on our language. So that was this was. So Rabbi Yehuda, different people had different prayers, personal up in their life. Rabbi had this prayer to be saved from Azei Panim, Azu Panim. We discussed that Azu Panim, like everything, shame and embarrassment, they're the same, but they're very different. And Azut Panim and Az Kanamer, be as strong as a lion, and arrogance are very different. They're in the same mission. It's all how we use it. It's how do we use our power? How do we use our self-confidence? Can we be self-confident is wonderful, or are we arrogant? And therefore, one who's arrogant won't listen to others. He's going to end up in Gehenna. One who's humble, he sees greatness. When you see greatness, Moshe saw the greatest of the great. So you could become the most humble, and then you realize you have so much to learn. So then you're going to end up in Gan Eden, that fine line. Then we discuss Adam Ra, different things. Adam Ra, Chaver Ra, Shachen Ra, different influences. We have friends, or perhaps even they're friends. We like them, but they can be bad for us. They don't mean bad necessarily. And then we have bad people, and that can be sometimes the line between a tzaddik and a rasha is very narrow, and neighborhoods and the Rambam's wild halacha that you have to live in the desert if you can't find a good neighborhood. I know. On the other hand, we have to always find when are we being influenced, and when do we have the opportunity to influence others in a positive sense. And then the idea of the importance of, we want to avoid legal disputes, lifnim meshur adin, the importance of acting beyond the letter of the law to avoid judgment, because once we have judgment, it's fighting and everybody stands for the law. Obviously, many times lifnim meshur adin has limits, of course. We don't just let somebody punch you in the face and get away with it. Obviously, if somebody sees, of course you go to court. That's not what we're talking about. We all know that. You have to find that fine line between when we go to our legal requirements and when we go to lifnim meshur adin. And if we don't find that line, we risk losing our country. That's what the Gemara says. Lo charva Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim was destroyed. because of this too much fighting, not the willingness to give up on our legal claims. We live in a society where not enough people are willing to give up on their legal claims. Okay. We didn't get to Olam Yedam. We'll please God discuss that next week. And let me just see if there are any questions. More mitzvot in Averot, right? So the Rambam has a lot of things he didn't follow. The Rambam says you should sleep 8 hours a day. He didn't sleep 8 hours a day. The Rambam said, most importantly, the Rambam said you're not allowed to live in Egypt. That's Allah in the Torah. So there are apparently, I'm not expert enough in the field, but I mean, there are apparently handwritten, they have, these manuscripts of the Rambam where he writes at the end of when he would write something, I violate 3 prohibitions of the Torah every day because he lives in Egypt. The Torah says you're not allowed to live in Egypt. So I remember, people know in Toronto, I believe David Kashitsky was the valedictorian many, many years ago in Or Chaim. And I believe his valedictory speech was he explained why the Rambam didn't violate the prohibitions of living in Egypt, why it only applies to a community, going back, all kinds of reasons why he didn't violate. But it is interesting. But listen, people do as I say, not as what can I do? Nobody's perfect. But the true matter is that the Rambam didn't have a choice. He was born in 1148. The Almohades invade. That's the Taliban or ISIS of the day. Really, that's what it was. It's fanatical Muslims and, convert or death. And they fled to Morocco. And Morocco was a good place, as far as I know, to live as a Jew. And then they went to, there was nothing in Israel. They went to Egypt and became the doctor of the royal palace. So yes, and there was a big community in Egypt. That's what the Rambam writes. He had a big community, a lot of Jews there. So I don't know, but sometimes we live, the Rambam's writing, remember the Mishnah Torah is written as a halakhic code for the ideal world. The Rambam is the only codifier who writes about halachot that were not applicable in his time, the laws of the temple, the laws of sacrifice, the laws of political leadership. But that's how he ends. So the laws of the Messianic era, right? That's where the Rambam famously writes. The Messianic era, the same thing, only peace. I don't want to say only peace. The only difference is peace. That's it. Once you got peace, you got the Messianic world coming. That's why the Lubavitch Rebbe thought the Gulf War with Esher in the Messianic age. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. But So the Rambam is writing an ideal, unlike the Shulchan Aruch, the Torah, nobody else did that. Everybody else just wrote the halachot of their time that applied to them. So the Rambam is writing this idealized world. You have the wonderful communities. Obviously, in the real world, it's not always possible. Yes, it's hard to do mitzvot in a cave, correct? But I think the Rambam was afraid that if you were out of the cave, you'd be influenced much more to be negative mitzvot. But I listen, we can never take one Rambam in isolation. I don't think the Rambam would advocate. Listen, we know Maimonides, right? Maimonides, your Maimonides, my Maimonides. The Rambam is the most, everybody claims the Rambam backs them. The Reformed Jews claim the Rambam agrees with them. The Hasidic Jews, the Litvaks, the Kolo people, modern Orthodox, because the Rambam is everything. He's so complex, and you can find everything in the Rambam, and it's how you interpret it, right? What would the Rambam be like if he came to alive today? Maybe he would be like, a professor of philosophy, in the university, in a secular university, without a kippah. Like, who knows? It doesn't really matter. But the Rambam in this context is just discussing the influences that we all have. Okay. Any other comments or think? Okay. Somebody asked me privately, a bibliography for people who want a bibliography for tefillah. Oh, that's interesting. The Nod Yehuda made a hesped for Maria Teresa. Okay, I did not know that. Wow. Okay, interesting. Okay, I can try. Yeah, it's not so hard. Maybe I'll send it out by email. A bibliography of tefillot. I don't have so many books, but whatever. There is. I will say in the one I think is the best, but it's in Hebrew, is this 6-volume work, Netib Bina, of Jacob Jacobson. You remember Moshe Sokolov used his book on the Haftorah.
Bina B'Mikra.
Yeah, Bina B'Mikra is his commentary on the Chumash. So here he has a 6-volume work on the Tefillah. It's fantastic. The classic work on Tefillah is Otzar HaTefillot. It's one of the classic commentaries on the bottom, but again, it's all in Hebrew. Birei Tefillah, this just came out, this course in English. All the Koran and Art Scroll, all that stuff is all very nice, but it's not really comprehensive. It's not as detailed. They have nice, beautiful comments. It's meant as an inspirational work. It's not the study of the Siddur, it's to inspire you while you pray, but they have good, and some of them are good. I mean, read Jonathan Sachs's introduction to the Siddur. That's phenomenal, right? If they're going to read one thing on the Siddur, in the introduction to the Koran Siddur, Jonathan Sachs, I mean, everything he writes so beautifully, but he has a beautiful idea of the Siddur. And of course, read the Rav Soloveitchik. Do I have it here? Hold on. Maybe in my room, actually, because I was reading it. Yeah, so I don't have it here. But one of the, when they put out after the Rav passed away, all the manuscripts of the Rav. So the first one they put out was on prayer. The Rav, read the Rav stuff on prayer, because the Rav has, the famous idea, the Rambam, we only pray out of need. And, the Rav is with his philosophical underpinnings, puts prayer in different contexts. It's the philosophy of prayer. It's also very worthwhile reading. I have the Abu Draham. I mean, this is this is one of the basics, but I think it's very good. I go to the Chaim Levi to pray as a Jew. You want scholarship? Here, I'll just take what I have in my Shefer, Elbogen. So this is a German Jewish scholar. I believe, I don't know if he was a Reform rabbi or not. I don't remember, but this is it's very good, but it's very academic. How this is development here, the period of the Piyut, a whole thing, the Reform movement outside Germany, synagogue construction, poetic editions, prayers for special dates. This is also the scholarly book. It was written in German, I believe. Of course, I read it in English and whatever. So there's more. I mean, you can read Danny Schwerber on changes in Jewish liturgy, what we can change in our prayers. But what do we have? Oh, this is very good, but it's cute. It's this is the thing of the Torah Tmima, the Bar Shamar. I don't think it's a thing. So he just comments on little parts. And this is the Ktav Ukabbalah, Mecklenburg. Yeah, very good. Yeah. So he had different dates. And of course, one of the classics, the one who quotes everything to the Chumash, the Abu Draham, the medieval Spain, the Abu Draham, but very clear Hebrew, very, very beautifully done. So these are some of the, and this, I don't know, the Slota Davram, it's like a one line on top and 500 pages of commentary. I haven't used this so much. And there's more stuff, but in English, there's right. They have the Koran, the RCA, all these Siddurim in English. I picked up the Rav Kook Siddur recently, so I don't know there's more stuff, but I hope that's a little bit. Here, I didn't. Where's this? Okay, that's enough.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, Shabbat Shalom. Don't want to keep everybody. Everybody have a wonderful Shabbat. Sunday morning, Rabbi Liebtag, and 11:15, and we look forward to seeing you. We're putting the final touches sort of on our winter schedule. I think next week we'll have a couple special shiurim, which we'll sort of announce last minute. But anyways, as we're putting together stuff, so we like to hear from you. We're going to wish everybody well and Shabbat Shalom and all the best. Okay, have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well, be safe, be healthy. Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.